So there are two sides to the creative process. There is the creative side, and there's a strategic side. Let's talk about this. So the creative side, the creative process, is the process of coming up with as many ideas and thinking outside the box and coming up with basically divergent thought. So if you look at this, there's two different ways to say this. There's green light and there's red light. There's convergence and then there's divergence, or divergent and then convergent. There is creative and then there is critical thinking. So let's look at this. These are all kind of the same things, right? The yin to the yang. We've got multiple facets of starting and creating a project from beginning to end, and figuring out the recipe for how you communicate and figuring out the recipe for a particular project. So every project goes through this process where you start off with divergent thinking, or you start off with green light thinking, or you start off with creative thinking. They're all the same thing. Basically, these are all the same terminology. Basically, open thought, where you're creating something brand new. You're coming up with multiple ideas. You don't say no. You just say yes. My favorite exercise with this is an improv where it's just you say yes and. So if somebody comes up with a crazy idea, you're like, oh yeah, of course, So someone says, oh my gosh, your foot is off. Like, yeah, I know. I can't believe that that shark bit me. Why didn't you save me? And then you kind of move it back in. It's like, I don't know. I'm not very good at improv, but basically what it is you have the yes and then you have an and. So you say yes and then you raise the stakes, or you bring in more information. So that's the creative process, right? Now you have to have somebody who says stop. At some point you have to say stop. But we love watching good improv because we like seeing how people can take creative ideas and continue to improvise off of something, and then get back to home, get back to the origin of the story, to resolve it some way. That's really what we love. We love seeing the resolve, because we know that you can get into the creativity, the creative brainstorming world, but if you can get back home, that's really great. Another example of creative thinking would be improv music, right? So an improv in music is all about following the leading tone. So every note or every key, like a major key scale, it has do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, ti, do. So the leading tone, ti, do, it wants to move up to resolve. So every single note in so the leading tone is what kind of resolves tones. So we want to move up a step and down a step. Everything in the chord progression moves up a step, down a step. So you do that over and over and over again. You use multiple different. You can go in and outside the key signature if you want to, but basically the whole point of improv music is to go away from home and then come back home. And sometimes you never fully get back home, and home being like the one chord. So do, was like do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, do. So do would be like the home, right? So we got to know what home is. So you got to know what the scale is. So in order for you to be creative, you need to know what you're creating with. So if you're creating, if you're painting, then you need to know that your colors are all going to be need to be there first. So there's a setup period before you're actually in a position to create. And once you're in that position to start creating, then you start letting yourself go freely, and you can create as long you can come up with as many different ideas as you'd like, but at some point you have to say stop. And it's the divergent thinking that when you diverting into multiple things, you have to at some point say, okay, we're done with divergent thought. We've got all these ideas out here. We've put so many different thoughts into the world. We've improv'd as many scenes as we can. We've improv'd this scene a million different ways. What's going to be the one we print? What's the one we're going to stick with? What's going to go on the page? And it requires a different mindset where we have to now take and categorize different things. And then we need to look at the whole of it, bring it down into its most simple form, and sometimes weed it out as much as possible. So, you think about, if you think about the most robust symphony and the most creative musical piece that you could possibly think of, and then you think of pop music. Well, pop music is natural curation. You're creating something that if you were to take a very, very sophisticated piece of music that's extremely creative, then if you want to make it more pop, more palatable, then you're going to have to kind of weed it down to where people can understand it. So these are the two different kinds of modes of operations. You've got this green light mindset and you've got this red light mindset. You've got something that is divergent in thought or divergent in thought. And then you have something that's convergent in thought. And usually somewhere in the intersection of these two is where innovation really happens. Innovation doesn't tend to happen on the creative side. It tends to happen somewhere where the divergent thought connects with the convergent, where things are starting to come together. And usually these things start aligning at an iteration or like at basically an MVP or a minimum viable product. And once you have that MVP, then you have your first data set. And so once you have your first data set, you can iterate and you can do the same type of function off of the same thing. You have divergent thought and then you have convergent thought. So the whole point is the intersection of convergent and divergent, the intersection of red and green is where innovation tends to happen. We see new things happen. We see different things come in, different things manifest. So taking this into a more practical perspective, how do we actually accomplish this? So a real quick, really good example and really good exercise to really implement this is to ask yourself, am I in a green light zone or am I going to be in a red light zone? Red light is categorizing, breaking things down, cutting things down, editing. Green light is unbridled. And I think that it's probably it's good to have a limit on both. You should have a limit on both. You have a limit on how much you allow yourself to go to go crazy on an idea. So you basically set a timer for 2 minutes and say, I'm going to write as many ideas down in 2 minutes as I can possibly think of. And you can do this with a group, you can do this by yourself, but I'm going to look at this one problem that I want to solve, and I'm going to come up with as many different ideas as I can possibly think of, and write them down as fast as possible, and then you stop, take a break, go take a bite of your favorite meal, go on a walk, whatever. Come back to that sheet or come back to those Post-it notes, whatever it is, however you've organized it. And then I want you to put your red light hat on and say, what do I not need here? What's going to work? What's not going to work? And start cutting those things down into pieces. You start looking, okay, how can I categorize all these first? Like come up with like 3 or 4 different categories, 3 to 5 different categories, right? And then take those and say, okay, which ones of these categories make the most sense? And then from those ideas, you can actually come down to maybe one primary point or one primary objective or one real key idea that you see happening over and over again, and you can get your first iteration there. So you start with as many as you can, then you come down you start sorting those things down into sorting it down into little pieces of it, like 5 different areas, and then you look at those 5 and you get which one's most relevant right now. This is really this is not just the creative process. This is design thinking. This is a creative process from start to finish. You start with coming up with as many ideas as you can come up with. You find one thing that works. You focus on that thing that works, and you break down that thing that works. And then you have your first piece to put out. So this is really the way that this is really the two kind of modes of operations that we have in life. Is we have red light, green light. We've got convergent and divergent thought. We have strategy, and then which is the elimination of things, focusing on one thing. And we have creativity, which is exploring the infinite. So so give yourself some permission today. Write down, do this exercise. Put 2 minutes to be very, very creative and come up with as many ideas as you possibly can to solve a particular problem, or to enhance something, make an improvement. And then look at, and then take 2 minutes to do some decluttering of that tangled web. And only focus on that tangled web. Don't introduce any more ideas into this. Just literally take what you've put out there and whittle it down. So this is the two sides of the creative process: coming up with lots of ideas, and then the one that's curating. And what's amazing about both of these arenas is that the editing selection, a lot of that is being done for us in some way, shape, and form in the content world, because we have so much data that's coming through from voice, through text to speech, and just the way that the internet is wired can be really helpful to look at the data that comes back, and then to create iterations off of content that way. If you want to look into that, Gary Vee is actually really good at doing that kind of work. But anyways, I'm getting off into another tangent. To bring it back home, those are the two things. Focus on that. Give yourself a time limit. Focus on focus on creating, and then focus on whittling down that creation into something that's powerful for your audience. And let me know how it goes. Thanks.